Now I know just about better than anybody that playing light tanks can sometimes be a bit, Alright, place your bet. What absolutely stupid tank is gonna YOLO us here? Because it seems to happen every battle I go here. Is it gonna be the SU-100? The KV-2? To no one's surprise. To literally no one's surprise. E8, hello. McFly. Literally anyone on this SU-100. Literally anyone on this, like, no one is shooting this guy. In the open, not moving, sitting still. He's asking to get shot. Oh, almost. Recently, I've been seeing a bit of an influx in players who, somewhat coincidentally, big air quotes, are professional critiquers of light tank gameplay on my teams, who also play basically no light tanks whatsoever. So I feel like now's the time to make a guide like this, considering learning how to play light tanks is already pretty discouraging in the first place. These people do not make it any easier, I can tell you that much. And trust me, I've marked a bunch of light tanks. I've marked a bunch of difficult light tanks like the ELC even 90 is one of the hardest tier 8 marks in the game. And there's plenty of people that on a regular basis tell me that I'm not good at scouting, I'm not good at this, not good at that. And I largely write it off because, well, duh, literally 3 stripes on the barrel of an ELC. I feel like that's enough to know at least moderately what you're doing. But if you're a new player, that's going to be highly, highly annoying because you don't know what you're doing yet. And I say that in the best way possible because you just haven't figured it out yet. It's awesome when you do. I mean, even I still die all the time to just different means of whatever happens in the battle. But that being said, if you don't know what you're doing yet, it's even more frustrating. So this is kind of built towards that kind of player. I know people use the term 4D chess a lot, but that's kind of mentally what you have to go through with the minimap when you're playing light tanks. You gotta think of, where's the enemy? Where's my team? Where can my team shoot right now? Where will they be able to shoot in a minute's time? Where do I need to be in about 30 seconds in order to see this guy coming here at about 30 to 40 seconds so that this guy can shoot him from where he is now because he's not going to move. So yeah, it gets complicated. I'm not even going to act like it doesn't sometimes. Obviously, sometimes it's as easy as, haha, peek, there's a guy, and then he just gets obliterated. Alright, there's Pantera. Hey, Pantera! Yeah, shoot the Pantera, yes! Now, this is not so much of like a deep dive, I guess. It's not one of those. I'm not going to go into the actual specifics of, like, depending on this caliber of gun, and then this distance from the bush means you'll lose this much camo when you shoot, which means as long as you're at this distance or longer, you won't be spotted. I'm not gonna dive on that. You don't care enough to listen to that, more than likely. And if you do, Dark Ninja, who's a much, much better player than I am, is making a video about that, which I'll try and link somewhere around here if the video's already out. If it's not, oopsie daisy. Just want to briefly interject to insert videos that were made by Sir Paddington Bear and Dark Ninja, who are both much better players than I am, covering the mechanics of the game and not vaguely how they work, actually, specifically how they work. So if you want to know that, which is half of the, trick of playing light tanks, definitely watch those videos. However, this is for the mentality. If you already know generally how the mechanics work, like bushes give you camo kind of thing, then yeah, this video is for you and we can continue. But this is more of just like a general rule of thumb kind of thing on how to play light tanks at a starting level. Now, this is not your 7 easy tips to mastering light tanks video as well. This is kind of just like, if you mentally process these things on a regular basis, God, this sounds like a stock trading ad. It won't be easy to play light tanks, but it'll become a little easier to understand the dynamic of like how it works throughout the battle. Moderately needless to say, playing light tanks, not simple. Or at least on the surface, it's the hardest class to play. I'll put it as that. And I feel like that's not going to be contested very much, because on the surface, playing light tanks is highly unintuitive. Because, well, bush mechanics, spotting mechanics, camouflage mechanics, each tank has a different unique view range, plus some can mount some equipment and others can't, and then you throw CVS in the mix at tier 8, so yeah, it gets complicated fast. Lots of math, lots of I don't care when it comes to math as well. So let's just not and say we did. Take this first one with a grain of salt, because this kind of assumes you have a couple things going in your favor and you have a couple things going on at the same time. So tip number 1 is, and again, take this with a grain of salt, ignore your team. And I say this for a couple reasons. Now, there's an exception to this. Well, actually, there's many exceptions, but the main one I'm going to cover in a minute is important. But when I say ignore your team, I don't mean if you're sitting and sniping and people are telling you to try and spot things, there's probably some weight to that argument, especially if you're the only light tank left in the battle, which we'll get to later. There's some weight to that argument. There's some weight to their argument as to, hey, you should try spotting things, especially if your team's losing. You should try and edge that back towards having an advantage. Now, I mean ignore your team when you are passive spotting in a bush and you are confident that that bush will at some point see someone within the moderately near future. On Prokhorovka, that moderately near can be about like 7 minutes, but it's worth it for, again, we'll discuss in a minute, being the last light tank alive. So what I see so often, and is the main reason I'm making this video, is so many players who do not play light tanks do not understand the difference between spotting things and just spotting, because there's a difference. And I know it's on the surface, it's just seems like that's the same thing. To a degree it is. But here's the difference, at least in my mind. It's very easy to spot things. EBRs do it all the time. How to spot things: you drive straight towards the enemy team until a bunch of markers show up, and then if you don't explode, congratulations. It doesn't sound very good, does it? Versus just spotting. Now, just spotting, I feel like passive spotting is probably better than, you know, just spotting things. But there's two main types of spotting. There's aggressive spotting and there's passive spotting. Aggressive spotting means you're actively moving around the battlefield trying to find things. That can still work. It's not as good as it used to be, but it can still work. Passive spotting is you're kind of sitting still, maybe moving a little bit in bushes. And I think EBRs have done quite a number on people's mental game when it comes to actually scouting, because a lot of people don't think passive spotting works anymore. It absolutely does, especially at tier 8 and above, where CVS is the thing, which we'll get to later. But for the short version of the story, the light tank who's moving is going to be at a disadvantage to the one that is sitting still when CVS is in play. And even if it's not, a light tank that's moving is more likely to hit a tiny little gap between two bushes and be spotted, versus the person who's sitting still in the bush is just not going to be spotted because they're in full camo. Now, I mean, people don't understand passive spotting, because all too often I have battles where I'll go to a spotting bush, no one will get up lit for a little while, no one will get spotted for a little while, and my team will get, you know, angsty, or, you know, they're like itchy trigger fingers, I guess is a better way to put it, because they haven't been able to shoot anything yet. Now, I understand that. Here's the thing. Your teammates, if they are complaining about the no spotting, I'm not going to say every time, but most of the time, if they're complaining about things not being spotted, they do not care if you live or die to get the spotting, because they just want to shoot at a tank. Now, people who don't understand how light tanks work often thinks that you can just, there's a tank, you can just spot things as if you just want to spot them. Again, EBRs I feel like have done quite a bit of damage on people's mental game on how spotting works, but that's besides the point. You can't just tank. You can't just pop one into existence right there. This is where the difference between spotting things and just spotting comes back into play. Just spotting relies on patience, and that's something a lot of players don't have, as you'll notice from in-game chat if you have it still enabled. You'll often have times where your team will tell you like, dude, spot something, I want to shoot stuff, dude, spot this, spot that. And then, again, to go with the title of the video, Noob Light, go spot. It's kind of become a joke in the community because of how often tank destroyers say it, and it's not that much of a joke. It is a joke, but you'll see it all the time. They just don't really understand that you can't just pop a tank into existence just because you want to. It'd be amazing if you could do that, but you really can't. Because you gotta think about it from your perspective, and this is where you have to be a little selfish with how this goes. And trust me, I'm like the biggest team player I can really think of. The thing I hate the most in this game is seeing me and another guy and 8 enemies opposing us, and he's like stuck in a corner and I can make a getaway. The thing I absolutely hate the most in this game is leaving that guy. So when I say you gotta be a little selfish here, it is life and death. Okay, so with that out of the way, you have to understand that just because you spotted a tank and your team shoots it does not mean it was a good idea by default, because you could get 3,000 spotting in the first 2 minutes of the game. But if you're dead, what good was really any of that? Obviously it could go worse, but what good in reality did it end up being? This is why you gotta have some patience. This is why sometimes you have to ignore your team, and this is where the exception kind of comes into play, because if your team says, hey dude, spot this, or spot that, or spot something, you could take it upon yourself to either ignore it or take them up on that, based on the situation. Now, just a rule of thumb, if it's Prokhorovka bush line and you're 2 minutes into the game, I wouldn't really advise it. But if it's, you know, kind of a safer environment and it's available for them to get shots, you may want to take them up on it, because the exception to this is I have had people say, hey, I'm aimed here, there might be someone there, can you check it out for a second and then make a getaway? And the people who do that regularly, even if they miss or don't deal damage, it is so comforting to a light tank player knowing that someone's at least gonna try. Because so often I'll spot a target with a ton of people behind me. They're not doing anything else except for looking for things to shoot at, and they still won't ever hit the tank that I spot. It's highly annoying. This is why marking light tanks is 1,000 times easier in a platoon, because you can guarantee at least one guy you have direct communication with, more than likely, is going to be shooting down at whatever you are spotting. So if a teammate says, hey, I'm aimed at this, do you think you could spot it? And then you could say, no, I think it's a bit too contested of an area, or sure, I'll do a run in about 5 seconds. And then you do a run, thing gets spotted, gets shot basically instantaneously because the guy was looking. That's the good side. But you really got to take it upon yourself to go, okay, this guy in his tank destroyer told me to go spot this area, or go spot something. What are the odds that when I go up there, I find 7 people and die for 2 shots of spotting assistance? And that's where you gotta be a little selfish, because it's life and death. Your teammate who tells you noob light, go spot something, does not care if you live or die. They just want to see a target and hit a target, and they don't really think much after that a lot of the time. Some do, most don't. So you gotta, you know, pick and choose your battles with where you want to go spot. That's like the biggest tip I can give, because what I see so often is people often get peer pressured into going to spot an area. This used to happen to me all the time in the past. They would say, I know there's a guy right here, go spot it. And I know it's a bad idea, and I'll spot it, and then just get absolutely slammed by a tank destroyer for over half my hit points. And with that caliber of gun, you're losing modules, you're losing crew, you maybe get set on fire. It's not good business. It's not good news, no matter what. And it's tough, because if you're a new player and your teammate's like, hey, spot this thing, you go spot the thing, and then everybody misses, you're never going to listen to a teammate ever again. Even if said teammate is like a good shot, they got a good gun, they're at a good distance, they got a good angle, and you may still not go and spot for them, which is when they'll get a little aggravated that there's an opportunity to spot things and you didn't. So a lot of this is just internal intuition and learning situations. It honestly probably won't take that long to recognize a situation that's just going to get you killed versus one that you could maybe get away with. The second biggest tip I can possibly give for playing a light tank: be the last light tank alive, and underline that 50 times. Now, I'm not saying camp it out until you're the last one left. I'm saying play it cool until, you know, all the other light tanks get too aggressive and die, or you at least know where their light tank is enough to feel confident enough to move up. And this is where light tanks like the T-49, the Char MLE, the VK-105 tier 6 howitzer tank all get like astronomically more powerful, because they are notably worse at spotting than the enemy light tank, most likely. But they are also notably better at killing said enemy light tank, which you can only be a worse spotter than the enemy light tank if there's an enemy light tank left in play. That's why they're quite powerful, is because if I, in my T-49, are against an AMX 1390, I know I gotta play it a little more safe, more than likely, because that 1390 will see me first, and his team will see me first, and I may end up dying. So wait for them to move up to a position where you at least know where they are, probably by testing with Sixth Sense. You'll know, because you'll get spotted somewhere you won't really expect to be spotted after a while gaining that intuition. Again, this just takes a ton of practice. I hate saying that, but it's true. Once you build up confidence, you can say like, okay, he's either here or he's here. If it's safe to do so, you can check one of the spots. Like on Redshire, there's a little hill in the middle of the map. You can go up to said bush where the tree is. And if you're getting spotted from either this way or this way, you can pretty safely kind of make a run around where that bush is. If you don't find anything, he either fell back or he's not there. However, if you catch him out, massive damage in one hit, probably killing the enemy light tank. You can only be a worse light tank at spotting if you and them are both alive. So I cannot stress this enough. Your utility value as a light tank skyrockets exponentially when you are the last light tank left in a battle. This is basically solely how Prokhorovka works. Like, the entire battle swings on whatever light tank is left alive last. I've seen battles swing from a range of 1 to 7 as the score, and it's swung all the way back to 15 to 9 because it got to be 7 to 1, but then the enemy light tank got greedy, got killed, and then they just counter spotted their way all the way back down the line. It matters an indescribable amount that you are the last light tank left alive. Obviously, sometimes your team is not going to do squat, regardless of how long you live and regardless of how effective you do at spotting. You just make do with those games. They're gonna suck. You're gonna hate them, I'm gonna hate them. They happen more often than I care to admit, and they'll continue to happen for the rest of eternity. Steamroll teams just happen. So you make do with what you got. Being the last light tank left alive on your team in a close game is absolutely key for winning battles. That's why Clan Wars, there's so many Clan Wars replays on, again, Prokhorovka, and other maps as well, where one team's EBRs, there'll be 3 EBRs on each team, and the team with the last surviving EBRs will win. I'm not going to say it essentially doesn't matter what the score was before that happens, but once that happens, the tide completely shifts. Because you are seen, the enemy is not seen. How are you going to fight against that? And it's key. And it's one of the best feelings in a light tank that you could possibly have, is when you're the last light tank left. Because when you're the last light tank left, you have open reign on the battlefield. You can do basically whatever you want within reason. But knowing that you'll have better camo, better view range, and will outspot essentially anything you meet that isn't sitting still in a bush is the best feeling, because that's what you dream of in a light tank. Knowing you can do that is the best feeling, because it gives you that confidence to do it. And when you know you can do it, bliss. Absolute bliss. Okay, so when crap hits the fan, and trust me, it will, regularly, you just gotta maintain distance, make use of your gun. Not all light tanks are created equal. Some have better guns, some have better reloads, some have better pen, some have better shell speed, some have better damage. Some have rocket launchers, and by some I mean 2, only one of which is actually any good, but that's besides the point. Light tanks come in all different shapes and sizes, but on a steamroll team, they are only really as good as you can make them before that battle inevitably kind of ends. Spotting at a certain point goes out the window with a lot of the maps, and you can only really rely on whatever your gun does. This is a big reason why I absolutely love the T100. The gun on that tank is absolutely fantastic. The pen, not so great. The gold, absolutely horrible. HE, same story. But that APCR standard rounds that it gets are absolutely magnificent. So, in a losing game, there is not really another tier 10 light tank I would rather be in than a T100. And yeah, I don't play the EBR just because I don't like it. I think it's too easy. That's just me. You can have your own opinions, but that's just me. I also think the T100 has a better gun than the EBR, especially in a close match situation, because the T100's gun is more accurate. The T100 has faster shells, to my knowledge. It may not hit as hard, but it's going to hit in the first place. And you have better view range than an EBR does. Crap hits the fan, you have to use the gun just as good as you can. Basically, use the gun as much as possible when you recognize, hey, spotting is not going to matter, I need to do something. And this results in a lot of high damage battles that you wouldn't normally expect to be having with light tanks. Bit of an extra one that I guess is more or less just for the light tanks that you like a lot and want to keep playing even after you've already researched it. Have 2 setups. Now I know this is kind of, duh, I have 2 setups. Have one setup built around using your gun and one setup built around using your spotting abilities. And I say this mostly because you and I both know at some point you're going to get on Himmelsdorf, you're going to get on Ensk, and CVS on Ensk or low noise exhaust on Ensk is totally worthless. There's no point trying to hide on an urban city map. Your options are very restricted. You can't do half the stuff you'd probably want to do as a light tank. As is such, boost up your gun's reload, boost up your accuracy, boost up your moving dispersions. My T49 is a perfect example of this. If I get on Empire's Border in a T49, I'm not even going to try spotting things, because the potential for that is a lot lower than if I used the gun effectively. So my first setup is CVS, optics, low noise exhaust. My second setup is bounty upgraded rotation mechanism, bounty upgraded vertical stabilizer, and bounty improved aiming. Absolutely nothing to do with the spotting. And then for, consumables, you have one for food, one for fire extinguisher. It doesn't matter too much, but it's good to have options just in case you get a close range brawling map and food is utterly worthless for view range and whatever else. And you also don't want to get set on fire. But with those 2 setups, I can reliably get, okay, Prokhorovka, spotting builds. Serene Coast, spotting build. Wide Park, never going to happen, but if it did, accuracy build. Himmelsdorf, accuracy build. Ruinberg, probably accuracy build. Having those 2 setups, always a good thing. T50-2 as well. I have a setup just for Wide Park in the T50-2 because the first setup's good for basically everything. But when view range literally doesn't matter, I just have everything into firepower. I have, ventilation, gun rammer. I think I have vertical stabilizer on a T50-2 if that's possible. But definitely 2 setups. Have a damage setup and have a spotting setup. This really only applies if you already have played the light tank a lot, you know how it plays, you like it, you want to continue playing it. So much so that you get to level 3 on its field mods. This, I guess, is that kind of tip. And it changes the way you play light tanks, or at least some of them. It changes them completely. Like the T-49, Frosty was stuck with, I believe, what did he run? It was a really, really awkward setup because he couldn't run 2 setups. He hadn't equipped he hadn't researched the Sheridan yet, so he could only use the 1 setup. I believe it was something along the lines of optics, vert stabs, and CVS. It was a very, very rough setup that he just tried to put together to maximize both, and it debatably worked, but it's very, very inconvenient to try and, you know, min-max when having 5 equipment slots would honestly be a bit of a stretch as to your effectiveness in a battle, at least with that gun. Another good example, Char MLE. Main setup, I believe, is vents. Oh, no, sorry. Main setup is CVS, low noise, optics, again. Very basic light tank setup. Second setup is vert stabs, vents, and improved aiming, just to maximize the gun's effectiveness. And similar to the T-49, if I get Empire's Border, accuracy build. If I get Ensk, accuracy build. Because you have no business trying to spot things on a map like Ensk. Your opportunities are next to nothing. And oftentimes you'll have to run away or run towards the enemy before it's gonna matter. So you may as well not even, right? But 2 setups wildly changes how light tanks work. And if you have those 2 setups, you are going to be at a huge advantage versus the guy who just has a CVS setup. I would love to see his CVS do something menacing to someone on Himmelsdorf, because I don't think it's gonna matter. Overall, patience. Patience, 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 patience is what you need to play light tanks. Not just for one game, but for like several in a row. You gotta be mentally prepared to just have like 5 straight battles where your team does absolutely nothing, because they will happen, and they do happen, and it will continue to happen. Sometimes you need patience in one game. For example, Prokhorovka, after the first 6 or 7 minutes, your team gets kind of itchy, they want to shoot stuff. I understand why, but you just got to be patient and let the other light tank make the mistake. It is literally Sun Tzu, the art of war. The opportunity to defeat the enemy will be presented by the enemy himself. Literally waiting for the enemy light tank to make the mistake, that holds very true. Because it's very, 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 very true. When you're the last light tank left in the game, you have better camo and better mobility than basically everything else in the entire match. So you can exploit that to win your team the game. To the extreme on certain maps like Redshire, Muravanka, Malinovka, Westfield as well. To the extreme. There have been games where you flip the tide of battle just because you're the last light tank left alive. And oftentimes you're not going to do it doing stuff like this. Let's just make that abundantly clear. This was just another well-played light tank game on a map that was like, oh, well, not a great light tank map. Let's see what we can do. Do not attempt that at home. That's in here because it's ridiculous. But yeah, patience is everything when playing a light tank. Whether it's against your team, whether it's against the enemy light tank, or whether it's just how the battle progresses. But patience, patience, patience is the biggest thing you have to have with light tanks. And it took me a while to get that down. So if you can nail that down as fast as possible, you're going to be in a good headspace for playing light tanks.